Madam President.
Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise to express my disappointment in today's earlier vote that we weren't able to pass the student refinancing legislation, and I want to thank my colleague, Senator Warren, for sponsoring that bill, and for my colleagues who did support that, and I hope that we will have a chance to bring this legislation up again and get bipartisan support and get it passed. We can agree that education is the gateway to opportunity. I was the first in my family to go to college and went to school with the help of financial aid, and I know how important it is to many students in the state of Washington that we help them make education more affordable. Student debt in this nation has quadrupled over the last 10 years, and so the total amount of debt is $1.2 trillion. So many students in my state are anxious about this situation, and they want to do something about it. Over the past 4 years, student debt has even surpassed credit card debt. So when you think about that, the fact that student debt is enough to pay every American's credit card balance and still have $450 billion left over tells you how much debt is being accumulated on behalf of students just to get an education, just to basically make their way in a changing economy. And we do live in an information age, and it means that everybody having a good base education and being able to adapt as new information comes along that changes industry is going to be critically important. And so the fact that student debt is now the second source of personal debt in America, only behind mortgages, puts a drag on our economy. And those who are suffering under this are real individuals. We just had a roundtable in the state of Washington last weekend with some of the best and brightest at the University of Washington. And these students talked about how they were trying to invest in their own skills so that they could advance in their education. And many of the stories that they told were, not really out of the ordinary, but I think it's something that we don't think about. In a lot of these cases, these individuals were talking about how they were trying to get an education. Other people in their family, their brothers and sisters, were trying to get an education, and their parents were also trying to upgrade their skills, because in an information age economy, that's what happens. Everybody has to upgrade their skills. So these students are trying to do everything, but I was really moved by one student who said, I have a debt that seems to be the size of a mortgage for me, but I don't have the house that goes along with it. He was trying to say, I'm coming out of college with incredible debt, and how am I going to even afford the basic things that people look forward to, maybe not right after graduation, but as they start their careers and they start to move forward. These are individuals who contribute to our economy. They buy cars, they buy homes, everything. But this individual, a graduate of Central Washington University, told me that he pays the same amount for rent as he does for student loans every month. So in Washington State, the average student borrower owes more than $23,000 before they graduate. That's an increase of 22% over the last 5 years. $4,000 for the average student borrow at the University of Washington. So over the next weeks, thousands of students in Washington State will walk across and get their diploma, but when they accept the diploma and go into the world of opportunity, they will also be going with a lot of debt. We also heard from another student at the University of Washington how at this point in her career, as she graduates, the debt will be almost $100,000. So she wants to pursue a career, but when she thinks about how much she has to pay on that student loan, that's going to affect that. In fact, during her time at the University of Washington, there were points in which she worked 60 hours a week. Now, I don't know how anybody can continue their education and work 60 hours a week. So these are students who want to be able to refinance and pay down. In this case, somebody who has a 6% or 7%, this bill and legislation would allow them to refinance. The legislation, an undergraduate with $30,000 in student loan, for example, would save almost $5,000 over the life of their loan by refinancing of that interest rate, if it was like 6.8%, to the current undergraduate direct interest rate of 3.86. So that is real dollars to these individuals. That means much needed help for 25 million borrowers across the country. It could save on average of all those borrowers about $2,000 per loan. And in my state, it would mean relief for 451,000 students, just like the ones we just spoke to last week. So our students from everywhere across the state, I don't know if we have that chart, the University of Washington and in the Pacific Northwest took action into their own hands and produced a report. The report showed that the typical University of Washington student would have to work 54 hours a week for a full year to pay for 1 year of student education. So this is, I'm so proud that these students did their own report and got it on the front page of the Seattle Times, because it really spells out what we already have known, that the days when students could just raise the amount of money they need to pay for education by doing summer jobs is gone. The burden of debt and the amount of money owed is just impacting students. There is no way they can work their way through college at 54 hours or 60 hours a week and be able to do their academic work. So entrepreneurial activity among 20 to 34-year-olds is challenged. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York has found that for the first time, people with student loan debt are less likely to buy a house than those without. So it's showing up in our economy. And if you think about it, if this is what a generation of Americans are going to be faced with for the next decade or two, then that's going to have a ripple effect through our economy for several years. A recent study by the Brookings Institute found that student loan borrowers are 60 to 70% less likely to apply for graduate school than those without student debt. So again, now we have another complexity. Madam President, I look at this issue and I look at the fact that we have a worldwide demand for 35,000 new airplanes. We need 20,000 new workers in the aerospace industry. We have demands for computer scientists, something like 300,000 a year. We only graduate 70,000. I look at it and say, why aren't we helping to finance everybody who wants to get an engineering degree and a computer science degree? Why aren't we figuring out a way to make that more affordable? Because in an information age economy, that's exactly what we need to do, make an investment in education. But we can't make an investment in education on the backs of these students when they're coming out of college with this much debt, or trying to struggle even to learn these careers that are so vital to our economy, and they have to choose between working and actually studying. We'd rather they commit themselves to these careers and these educations so we can have the workforce of the future. Now, I know some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle didn't support this legislation, but the Congressional Budget Office projects that the bill would actually reduce the deficit by about $14 billion over the next decade. That's important because we want to see policies that are going to help our economy in the short run and the long run, but they have to be fiscally responsible. So I want to make sure that those critics who say, oh, well, if you make the interest rate lower, that students are going to borrow more money. I don't think that students are looking to borrow more to add to their debt. I don't think students that I talked to who had loans as high of $180,000 want to borrow more money just because you're going to reduce the interest rate. They want to refinance, reduce their obligation, and get back to studying. So there is much more that we need to do to mitigate the costs of higher education, and I know my colleagues and I are going to be working on that, but the Bank on the Student Loan Emergency Relief Act was a very good step to help students and to focus them on their careers and their education. So again, I hope my colleagues on the other side of the aisle will look again at this issue and get back to it. We need to make sure that college education is more affordable. It's time for us to extend the same benefits that we do for businesses and mortgages to students so that they can refinance, and that 25 million students in America could refinance their student loans. So I thank Senator Warren for bringing this issue up, and I hope we will get back to it again, Madam President, and I yield the floor.